Thank you very much for coming to the what is now February 2023 virtual Melastome seminar. This month we have another seminar related to reproductive biology in Melastoma, and Juan Angulo will be talking about Dioecy in Miconia. I know a lot of Melastome people that don't know that there can be some Dioecy in the family. Juan is originally from Colombia, but grew up in Georgia, where he also went to the University of Georgia as an undergrad. He had some experiences working there in different projects, and then the Chicago Botanic Garden as well. And that's where he found his love for botany and made it here as a graduate student right in the middle of the pandemic. So even though he was a grad student, we didn't meet in person for the first 4 months he was a student, and he's working with me now. He's about halfway through his PhD, and he will be giving us a lot of preliminary data and a lot of ideas about what he's doing. And actually, I want to encourage anyone that wants to present that these talks don't have to be finished products. It's great to have talks that are presenting ideas and then get feedback from other people. And I want to encourage more people to do that. So without further ado, go ahead, Juan.
Awesome. Thanks, Fabian. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all. I'm going to share my screen. So as Fabian was mentioning, I'm going to be talking about Dioecy and also just reproductive strategies in general, about Miconia, but also niche evolution. And so this is going to be a talk focused on work that is on several different projects, ranging from nearly complete to completely conceptual. So if at any point you guys can't hear me or anything, just let me know. First, I would like to situate us in one of my favorite parts of the entire world, which is the tropical Andes, which runs from Venezuela to Bolivia. And if you've never been, they are really, really big mountains. They have steep elevational gradients as seen here. This is in Peru. And one special thing about these mountains is that they have stunning habitat heterogeneity within this elevational gradient. So we have lowland forest down below that can be hot, humid, and rainy. And then we have mid-elevation cloud forests that are also rainy, but as you start going up in elevation, the temperature starts dropping. And then we have these high altitude grasslands where the trees get smaller. Sometimes there's no trees. And that's the Andes. They're very, very special places with many, many different kinds of plants. And that's where the plants that I'm studying are found. So as we know, Miconia is a huge genus, but there is a clade, Miconia 3, that is about 500 species. And this clade is made up of the sections Cremanium, Canopleura, and Ambliarena. They're mostly found in the Andes, but we have some members in Central America and the Caribbean, and they're found from sea level to up to 4,000 meters, and they can be trees or shrubs. And importantly, some are dioecious, specifically in section Cremanium. There's been some work done on that, but we don't know much about their dioecious nature. And so this system, and about their flowers, they normally have numerous flowers on an inflorescence with cream to yellow, just inconspicuous colored flowers and berry fruits. Very pretty. About their biogeography, we do know some. We don't have huge phylogenetic sampling, but what we do know here in this this yellow box, that's the clade Miconia 3, is that they likely stem from an Amazonian ancestor that went into the Andes and had subsequent incursions into Central America and the Caribbean. So when I saw this clade, I was like, wow, this is an amazing system to test a lot of my different interests, and one of those being reproductive systems and strategies. And so I wanted to dive deeper into this idea of Dioecy in Miconia section Cremainium. First, understanding really how many dioecious species are there, what's their distribution, and what makes them dioecious, what makes a female plant female, and what makes a male male. And so that's one project that I'm working on. Another is a closer look on a tentatively dioecious species, doing some field experiments. So actually going out into the field and working on them. And on the clade as a whole, I'm very interested in how plants are structured elevationally and latitudinally. And since Miconia 3 is spread out all throughout the Andes and has had these different incursions, I also want to look at what factors drive the species assemblage and structure in Miconia. And so that'll be the main things that I'll be talking about today. So yeah, so first I'll start off with what I've done the most work on, and that is about Dioecy. So hermaphroditism is the main mode of reproduction in flowering plants. As you can see on the flower on the left there, it's characterized by both male and female organs being on the same flower on the same plant. And so we have functioning stamens with pollen and a functioning pistil and ovules. Dioecy, however, is the separation of sexes on individuals. So we have pistillate flowers on female plants, often accompanied with vestigial male organs, such as these stamens. And then we have staminate flowers on male plants, often accompanied with vestigial female organs. And Dioecy is incredibly rare. It's found in 6% of species and 7% of genera. It's very, very rare, but it has a really wide phylogenetic distribution. It's found in 43% of families. Your favorite plant family probably has dioecious members in it, somewhere in some form. There's many advantages and disadvantages to Dioecy. Dioecious plants are obligate outcrossers, so they enjoy the advantages of genetic heterozygosity. And they also have the opportunity to specialize in sex-specific functions. So female plants can invest more energy into fruits, while male plants can invest more energy into pollen production. However, being dioecious means that the number of individuals that can reproduce is halved, since only the females can reproduce. And if you are a pollinator-dependent species, which many dioecious species are, in a scarcity of pollinators, you are at risk for extinction. And so these advantages and disadvantages have led many to wonder, what are the evolutionary consequences of Dioecy? What happens when a lineage evolves Dioecy? And traditionally, the view has been that it's an evolutionary dead end, in part because it's so rare and because of these different disadvantages, and another disadvantages such as dictated in Baker's law, which states that species that cannot self-reproduce will have a more difficult time colonizing new places. Because without, for example, in dioecious species, if you only have a pistillate or a female plant going to a new space, you need the staminate, the male plant, to continue reproducing. And but this idea has started to shift in recent times. There are new phylogenetic comparative methods that have shown diversification increases with Dioecy, and this might not be the case. All in all, we have a very wide breadth of dioecious literature, and on the other hand, there's also these advantages that could lead to increased diversification in Dioecy. But we have this wide breadth of dioecious literature. And one thing that I think a lot of people gloss over is what makes these studies possible to begin with. And that is the initial foundational documentation of Dioecy. How many species are there in the system? Where are they found? What habitat are they? And what are their what is the floral morphology? And so that's what I wanted to do in Dioecy in Miconia section Cremanium. The furthest we know is that there are about 44 dioecious species documented, but there's never been an in-depth analysis into how many there are. And there seems to be an unequal expression of Dioecy in the floral morphology between species. And overall, there's just a knocking and analysis of reproductive system morphology in these plants. And so I had a couple goals with this project. The first being to describe this floral dimorphism and delimit which forms encompass Dioecy, document the extent of Dioecy, so how many species are there, and then analyze patterns of dioecious Miconia in both geographic and ecological space. And so when I first came here to the New York Botanical Garden, I spent I still am spending many hours in the herbarium looking at this number is a little outdated. It's probably over 2,000 specimens of Miconia here. And I would start to separate them in species into those that had floral dimorphism. And I would sample them and dissect their flowers and take photographs of them and start to look at certain characters such as their stamen and anthers, the length of the style, the stigma, and the ovaries and the ovules. And so I would designate hermaphroditism to plants that had bisexual flowers with well-developed pistil and stamens. Often the stamens would have pollen inside, especially in unopened buds, and I would check that, and the pistil would be morphologically consistent in all specimens in a species. I would designate Dioecy to those that had clear unisexual flowers on separate individuals. And so this was characterized as such. And so here, I'll show you some of the patterns that I start to see. So this is the first example that I want to show you. This is Miconia caerulea. And so on the left, we have a pistillate flower from a female plant, and on the right, we have a male flower from or a staminate flower from a male plant. And so, there we go. And so here are the anthers from each. As you can see, they are wildly different in size and shape. These anthers here never have any pollen in them, and they are usually collapsed and much smaller than the functioning and pollen-filled anthers here on the right. And then, so no pollen in here. And that was seen in many individuals and in unopened buds. And then when we look at the gynoecium, we see a nice, well-developed pistil. It's long, it extends past the hypanthium, and a nice, well-developed stigma and ovaries. But then when we look on the right, there is barely anything there. This is a tiny vestigial tissue with some sort of semblance of a stigma, but barely anything has developed. And this, by the way, these are both mature flowers in this species. Next, I'd like to show you Miconia rubens. This is a Caribbean endemic. And so on the left, we have, or in the stamens, we have the same pattern of smaller stamens in the pistillate flowers, collapsed anthers with no pollen, and then pollen in these. And then, well-developed pistil with ovules, but here we have a little bit more developed gynoecium, but still not as much. So I'll retrace here. So just to show you guys the difference here, right? And so I would keep going in the herbarium, looking more, and then I started to find some more strange things, different kinds of morphologies, such as this one here, Miconia trigogona. And so these stamens were essentially the same in size, but on the left, no pollen. On the right, full of pollen. And then more interestingly, we have a much more developed pistil in the staminate plant here. The stigma is entirely reduced, but we do see some elongated growth of the style here. And we even have some development of the ovarian tissue, but importantly, there are no ovules. So this is assuredly a staminate plant. This individual simply cannot reproduce on its own, or cannot set fruit on its own. And then lastly is Miconia brachyanthera, and we have yet another morphology here. And so in the gynoecium. And so, yes, well-developed pistil down into a well-developed ovules, but here we see ovules. They are not as big in size, but they are more developed and they are there. So it is a striking difference between the last three that I showed you. And so I have been able to group these into three separate groups based on the varying morphology in the staminate flowers. So group one, which is the most speciose, 24 species, it's characterized by anstylostigma that are nearly absent or nearly absent and no ovules. Group two, about 18 species, stylostigma that are reduced and ovules that are absent to, in very rare occasions, like very tiny reduced developed ovules. And then species in group three, which is about 9 or 10 species, where we have a more developed gynoecium, but it's still very clearly reduced compared to pistillate counterparts. And so here's a diagram so it can be a little bit more clear. And it's important to note that the pistillate morphology is consistent across all species with floral dimorphism. We see the same well-developed pistil, but then anthers that are collapsed and lacking pollen. But in the staminate flowers, this kind of morphology is inconsistent across species. Within species, you will see the same, but across species, there's differential morphological expression here with varying reductions in the style and stigma, the ovarian tissue, and the ovules. And so far, I've looked at about 180 species out of 225 in Miconia section Cremanium. So far, I've documented 72 species with floral dimorphism, meaning I was able to find 2 separate morphs within the species, and 108 I've been able to designate as hermaphrodites. Out of these 72 with floral dimorphism, 62 I have confirmed Dioecy, meaning I was able to state that this is a pistillate plant with no functioning male organs, and this is a staminate plant with no functioning female organs. And so those are the species in groups 1 and group 2. In group 3, however, we see these ovules and we see a reduction in the pistil, but we're not quite sure if it's dioecious yet because of the presence of these ovules. And so these species were not assigned a reproductive mode, and as you'll see later on, we're working on that. As far as the geography, there's some very interesting geographic patterns happening with these dioecious species. 56 are Andean endemics, so the large majority are centered in the Andes and often with very restricted ranges. So these are just the occurrences of all dioecious Miconia in general. Species within the Andes are usually restricted to small areas, but we do see 56 Andean endemics, 7 Mesoamerican endemics, and then about 4 Caribbean endemics. And so we have these centers of endemism here that I think are really interesting. And then we also have 1 or 2 species in the tepuis. It's a little more tricky, but we do have these three areas. Despite their disjunct distribution, most species are found at mid-elevation habitats, 1,000 meters to about 3,000 meters. They can go a bit higher and they can go lower as well, but none are endemic to lower elevations. So we see this mid-elevation species richness of dioecious species, no matter where they're found. And so what is next? What do I do with all this really interesting patterns and data? And I want to bring a phylogeny into this. So this is where it starts to get a little bit more conceptual about what I want to do next. I would like to bring a phylogeny into this, and that's what I'm working on, and understand the origins and the historical biogeography of dioecious Miconia. So I want to know where Dioecy evolved and how many times did it happen. And one hypothesis is that the transition occurred multiple times and in differing locations, possibly correlating to these different centers of endemism, such as the Andes, the Caribbean, and Mesoamerica. And this pattern would support Baker's law, which is that dioecious or self-reproducing species have a harder time colonizing and dispersing over long distances. So if Dioecy were to evolve into these three separate places and these dioecious species are endemic and restricted, that would be one situation. Another situation would be a single evolutionary origin of Dioecy. Much further back, a single origin would imply that these dioecious species were able to migrate and diversify over really long distances across the neotropics, which is counterintuitive because you need both male and females to establish a new population. And so I want to tackle this with a phylogeny, and fortunately, Fabian has had many DNA tissue samples for me to work with, and I have about 300 species sequenced so far. Within Miconia section Cremainium, about 100 species sequenced so far. And with this phylogeny, I also want to look at Dioecy's effect on diversification. Is it really a dead end in all clades? I like to think that it's not. And so does Dioecy give Miconia an evolutionary advantage? If we were to see an increase in diversification, we would be able to possibly suggest that this evolutionary advantage has allowed it to diversify in these harsher environments, in these higher elevations where these dioecious Miconia occur. Alternatively, has Dioecy doomed Miconia to extinction? If we see a decrease in diversification, it would add on to the body of literature where Dioecy could possibly spell impending doom because of all of its disadvantages that comes with it. And so that was the first part. The next part is a more in-depth study on one of these dioecious, or tentatively dioecious species, on Miconia brachyanthera. So Miconia brachyanthera belongs to group 3. So it's one of these species with a much more developed gynoecium in the, what I'm tentatively calling the male plants. If you can recall here, so this is the pistillate, this is the staminate. And this plant is a Peruvian endemic, and it's found between about 1,000 meters to 3,200 meters. And so I want to, I want to do a couple things with this plant. I want to confirm its dioecious habit, and I also want to test apomixis in these plants, because as many of us know, apomixis is very common in Miconia, but no one has really looked at it in dioecious species or in these species with floral dimorphism. And so a little bit about apomixis. We already got a very lovely seminar last month by Anna on apomixis, but just a brief summary. It's asexual reproduction through seeds, and this results in clonal offspring. There's two different kinds: autonomous apomixis, which is independent of polymus, and pseudogamous, which is dependent of pollen, meaning in pseudogamous, pollen still has to make it to the female plant or to the plant for apomixis to occur. It occurs in about 65 species in so far that we've documented in Melastoma across 7 tribes, but is concentrated in Miconia. And so I want to look at this. Are any of these dioecious species, particularly Miconia brachyanthera, can they reproduce with apomixis? And I also want to look at pollination strategies in Miconia brachyanthera. Most Miconia are documented buzzing bee specialists, meaning bees will reach the anthers and buzz pollen out as a reward and subsequently filling themselves with pollen to take it to the next plant. But several species, especially recently, have been documented as generalists. These species are generally found in high elevation habitats, and they have wasps and flies and different kinds of bees that don't necessarily buzz come to them. And these species, rather than pollen, they offer nectar as a reward. And so in total, my objectives for my field studies in Miconia brachyanthera are to confirm Dioecy, test for autonomous apomixis, and document pollination strategies in both sexes and understand pollinator reward mechanisms. What is this plant offering to pollinators, especially the females that have no pollen to offer to begin with? And so the first step would be confirming Dioecy, and I haven't quite been able to do this yet, but the plan, I have the samples, they're on the way here to the garden, but the plan is to check for pollen germination using fluorescent microscopy. So if you stain a pistil, you'll be able to see the pollen tubes going down and into the ovules. And so I have seen this in hermaphroditic plants, and I'm assuming I will see the same in pistillate flowers of female plants. But I want to check to see if this is happening in these tentatively male staminate flowers. If I don't see any, then I think I can confirm that this plant and its relatives of this morphology are very likely dioecious. But then the question comes of, what about the ovules in Miconia brachyanthera? And so this, I've actually been able to do some preliminary experiments where I have taken a female plant and I have gone in and snipped the style off as soon as it comes out. And so I am effectively blocking any pollen from reaching the ovules. Fortunately, since I'm working with a female flower, with a female plant, I don't have to worry about self-pollination because there's simply no pollen in these flowers. And then I check if fruit set still occurs and do the same in the staminate plants. And so this is an example of what that looks like. I would wake up every morning and cut a couple hundred little styles off of these flowers and rebag them and wait to see if fruit set occurs. And I did this with no, I wasn't quite sure if it was going to work. Apomixis and Dioecy, a very rare combination, but I was able to do this experiment last year in Oxapampa and got some very surprising results. Quite a lot of fruit set for the treated plants, about 66% fruit set for the inflorescences where I cut the style and rebagged, and then about 90% for the control. So for the female plants, it seems that apomixis is able to contribute to quite a lot of the fruit set for each individual inflorescence. While, and then in the staminate inflorescence, I wasn't able to perform the actual experiment of bagging, but simply just looking at I say the staminate inflorescence, but the inflorescence with the smaller style and developed ovules, these still set fruit. And 88% fruit, so quite a lot. And that was quite an unexpected observation as well. So if these staminate, these male trees with staminate flowers are indeed, if this species is indeed dioecious, then what I'm observing is apomixis in both pistillate and staminate flowers in both male and female individuals, which is quite an interesting and exciting find. For the pollination strategies, I was able to take really fun videos with the help of Agnes of Miconia brachyanthera. And I would sometimes sit there and just watch so many different kinds of insects visit a single inflorescence, consisting of beetles, bees, flies, wasps. I saw a few butterflies, not many, 2 or 3, and also ants. I'm not sure how effective ants are at pollinating, but there were quite a lot of ants on there as well. And I was able to see that the female plants, at least, offer nectar as a reward rather than pollen. I was able to see droplets of nectar on flowers, and next time I go out to the field, I will try and measure sugar concentration. For the male flowers, I'm not quite sure. I would assume that they also give out nectar as a reward, but that is yet to be documented. That's for this field season. Overall, it seems that Miconia brachyanthera has a really powerful reproductive strategy of likely dioecy and also apomixis. So we have sexual and asexual reproductive systems here, which is really, really important. I think, and I find very, very interesting because you get the benefits of dioecy, such as inbreeding avoidance and sex specialization, but you're also able to sidestep the handicaps of dioecy with apomixis. So if a female plant were to colonize a different area, even in the absence of a male plant, it could continue reproducing clonally and wait for a staminate plant to reach and then to continue establishing the population. Since it has a generalist pollination strategy, this is very, very important, especially for pertaining to where it's found on the mountain and the fact that it's likely dioecious. So Miconia brachyanthera, as I said, 1,000 meters to about 3,000 meters, and it benefits, it likely is benefited from having this generalist pollination strategy because since it's dioecious, because it won't have to rely on a single pollinator, on a single group of pollinators, such as bees, especially in these higher elevation environments where pollinators are less scarce or they can be more volatile. It won't have to rely on just bees. So by expanding its selection of pollinators, it can increase its reproductive success. Another thing is that the composition of pollinators changes as well, not just the amount of pollinators as you go up, but the composition changes as well. There are less bees and more flies and wasps at higher elevations. And so this shift in pollination strategy and subsequent reward strategy makes a lot of sense for this plant. So that just about finishes up on the dioecy and apomixis aspects of my work in the reproductive systems and strategies. And next, I'd like to kind of switch focus and talk about species assemblage and distribution, in which I use the clade as a whole, all of Miconia 3, not just section Cremainium, to answer some really fun questions about species assemblages in the Andes. To give you guys a bit of background about climatic niche evolution and phylogenetic niche conservatism. Niche evolution is the divergence away from the ancestral niche. And so this has been documented many times in the Andes, especially from lineages adapted to warm climates in the Amazon and evolving new niches and thriving in these higher elevation, colder environments, very stark differences in environments. But alternatively, there is also phylogenetic niche conservatism, which is the retention of the ancestral niche throughout a lineage. And this has also been documented of plants colonizing the Andes, especially if North American lineages adapted to these cold temperate climates, coming down into the Andes as into these higher elevation, colder habitats, and subsequently diversifying. And so both of these are very well documented processes influencing the species structure in the Andes. But my question is, what about within the Andes? Once a lineage reaches the Andes, what happens as it diversifies across the elevational range of the Andes? And so I want to investigate the relative importance of both climatic niche evolution and PNC in Miconia as it diversified within the elevational range of the Andes, since it's found from 0 meters up to 4,000 meters, and also as it dispersed out of the Andes into the Caribbean and Mesoamerica. And so I'm going to do a comparative phylogenetic framework paired with distribution and environmental data. The goal here, as you can see, this is starting to get much more conceptual. The goal here is to reconstruct the ancestral niche of the entire clade through time and see where these shifts are, if there are shifts, where these shifts are, how frequent they are, or when the ancestral niche stays the same. And so there's one scenario in which I'd like to introduce first, and that's that phylogenetic niche conservatism governs the distribution of subclades, but this niche divergence, this niche evolution was integral in the lineage's ability to colonize different climatic regimes, basically going up the mountain. And down here, we have a schematic of what that would look like. We would have an ancestral lowland lineage that would progressively scale up the mountain. And so in space, we would see this as these structured communities of lineages, starting off with lowland, and then one niche divergence, further dispersion, and then another. The second, which is where climatic niche divergence takes a more prominent role, is when we have multiple incursions and instances of niche evolution into higher elevation regimes. And so this would take on, this would look more like the scenario below, where each star is a shift in climatic niche, and you see this across the entire mountain range. And so I want to build the phylogeny of Miconia 3 and test which of these scenarios is more probable. I think it is very likely a mix of both in the Andes. But then I'd also like to see what happens once this lineage left the Andes. What happens when it went into Central America and the Caribbean? Oh, sorry. Yeah. So hypothesis 1, few shifts in climatic niche. And then 2, many shifts in climatic niche. And so what happens when it went into the Caribbean and Mesoamerica? Was its dispersal constrained by ancestral niche? When it landed in when this lineage dispersed to these regions, did it stay in the same niche? And my hypothesis is that yes, clades within each of these regions will have largely similar climatic niches. So an example of what that would look like is below. So the Andean clade has a certain signature of climatic niche and a very similar signature in the Mesoamerican and Caribbean clades. While alternatively, in a different scenario, you see niche divergence in the Mesoamerican and Caribbean clades. However, I think that's unlikely given that many of these plants are found in wet, humid, mid-elevation forest throughout the neotropics. So to wrap things up, Miconia 3, I did not know about this system before coming here, before meeting Fabian, but let me tell you that I've fallen in love with these plants and their reproductive systems and strategies, especially how diverse, asexual and sexual systems in a single species.
Juan, we lost you. We lost your voice.
Hello?
I still hear him.
Agnes still
I
hears.
hear you. I hear you.
I hear you.
I hear too.
Might just be Fabian. Yeah, I think it's just Fabian.
Yeah, I think you should continue.
Okay, I'm nearly done. So I have fallen in love with these plants, and I cannot wait to test the phylogeny with the origins of Dioecy, the dispersal of Dioecy, and continue trying to prove epimixis in different dioecious plants and documented these pollinator shifts. And also at higher elevations, why some are found in mid elevations and low elevations. I'd like to thank the list of people below, Janelle, Fabian, Agnes, Diego, Carrie, everyone who's helped me collect plants and given me so much advice and mentorship these last 2 years. And also thank different organizations that have helped fund my fieldwork and research. And I think we have quite a bit of time left, so I'll take any questions now.
Great. Thank you so much. I think I solved my problem. I keep having computer issues. Sorry. So we have some questions in the chat. We can start with those. And so Diego asked, are most Dioecious Miconia also nectar producing?
Are most dioecious? So we don't know because there's so little done on the basic biology of these plants. I mean, the last count of dioecious species was 44. We have it up to 72 tentatively dioecious species. And for many of them, we don't have pollinator observations. I would assume that yes, they are nectar producers because in the pistillate plants for the pistillate flowers for these dioecious species, there's no pollen to act as a reward. So there has to be something inviting these pollinators in to get to pollinate. But we simply don't know. There needs to be a lot more field observations. And next time I'm out there, you can bet that I'm going to be staring at every individual flower I come across.
Can we see the faces maybe instead of this slide? I also have a question.
Definitely.
Okay.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Okay, so I have now 2 comments and a question. But just to talk about the nectar, do take diabetes sticks, because if you hold these diabetes sticks, you can easily see whether there's nectar. You touch the diabetes stick to the nectary.
And it'll change color.
Yeah. It's
yeah, that's the plan next time I go out. This last field season, it was my first time seeing these plants in the field, so it was very exploratory. I'm very wide-eyed and excited.
Yes, great. No, but so my comment concerns the general framework, your first part of the talk, small part of the talk about the evolution of Dioecy, that was just full of errors, erroneous statements. And I will give 2 examples. You claimed that only females can reproduce. Obviously, that's wrong because you and Fabien also reproduce, right?
Yes.
Every one of us here on this talk has a mother and a father who have successfully reproduced. That's why we are here. Okay, the demographic costs of potentially producing fewer seeds, because you have every second individual not producing seeds, is a possibility. However, where people have actually studied it, this terrible cost is compensated by higher seed production. Of course, this is a very, very big topic. And if you Google, you find immediately many papers on it. One that I want to draw your attention to is in American Naturalist 217, where an excellent group of people, Steve Hubble and others, have focused on the dioecious species on Barrow, Colorado Island, a subset, of course, and actually looked at seed production in closely related dioecious and non-dioecious species. And as you would expect, the ones who are dioecious produce more or less twice the amount of seeds, or better, bigger seeds, whatever, to compensate this cost. It is possible that there is a demographic cost, that Dioecy causes a demographic cost, but it hasn't been demonstrated. And the second claim you made was that Dioecy increases heterozygosity. Of course, it doesn't. The only thing that increases heterozygosity is mutations. Heterozygosity comes from de novo mutations, right? Increased heterozygosity. And in plants, Dioecy is, as far as we know, or the maintenance of heterozygosity, as far as we know, depends on the amount of SIP mating. Dioecy doesn't prevent uncles and aunts and daughters and mothers to pollinate each other, right? In sedentary organisms such as plants, SIP mating can only be reduced or is best reduced by incompatibility, which prevents fathers and daughters mating because they will have the same incompatibility alleles, right? Okay, I mean, I'm just going on and on here. These are general statements that you really need to rethink, and this framework of the advantages of Dioecy and the cost of Dioecy was just really wrong. And here's my question, or wrongly stated. Here's my question. I missed this Baker's Law business. Can you explain again where Baker's Law comes in? You had a slide where it has the 3 independent evolutions of Dioecy and this clade, and it said Baker's Law.
And so Baker's Law would state that species or individuals that cannot reproduce by themselves would have a harder time colonizing new habitats.
Okay.
Right? Because
Baker's Law states, I think we are in agreement. Baker's Law states that colonizing species will have a tendency to evolve selfing.
Or be selfers to begin with.
No, the interesting, well, the way Baker stated it was that it increased the mutations that would cause selfing or permit selfing would have a higher fitness on islands. I think we are in the same, we're going in the same direction. So, but the slide showed in the end, Dioecy is or particularly well represented in the Andes, the Caribbean, and Central America. So how does this relate to the islands?
Because they're long distance, there's long distance dispersal events.
But by that argument, every single angiosperm should be dioecious.
I don't understand.
Angiosperms disperse, a seed dispersal, right? And occasionally, by chance, it will be fairly long distance. And then this thing potentially can establish far away from the main population, right? And that, by your argument, should then lead to or favor the evolution of selfing. Wouldn't that mean that every angiosperm that sometime undergoes long distance dispersal should evolve Dioecy?
It would support that argument, but they're not.
Exactly.
But these are dioecious.
Yes, but they are not all island colonists.
Okay, yes, you have a fair point. They're not all island colonists.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, I just couldn't follow the argument. I couldn't follow how this slide with these 3 origins linked to Baker's Law. I just couldn't follow the argument.
Well, thanks for your comments, Suzanne. I know you have a really big breadth of knowledge in this subject, so I was expecting.
Yeah, but the fieldwork that you are doing is needed to further our understanding of the evolution of Dioecy in this clade. So it's absolutely a great project. It's just the framework that needs to be more carefully developed.
Definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Suzanne. We can, you and I talk later a little bit about this too. Do we have other questions?
Yes.
Go, Agnes.
I think I posted some in the chat. Juan, it was a really sweet talk. And really nice to see sort of where you were heading it and connecting it to bigger picture. When you were talking about the effects of Dioecy on diversification, I was wondering whether you already have an idea of how often Dioecy evolved in Miconia 3, because I guess your power of being able to see effects of that, like it will be really hard to tease apart effects from the species growing in mountains and maybe mountain habitat itself driving diversification versus Dioecy. And so I think the power of detecting such a thing really depends on how often the traits are replicated on a phylogeny. And technically, probably you'd need dioecious species also outside the mountains. So I was wondering whether you could fill us in on that.
Yeah, that's something a lot about what I've been thinking about. And also just to throw in another, like the mid-elevation species richness hump that's found worldwide. It would be really difficult to tease apart that specifically from Dioecy, but I don't think that doing that kind of correlative analysis would be detrimental at all. And as I do think that Dioecy has evolved multiple times, hasn't been proven quite yet. But some of in the past phylogenies, you do see that some of these Caribbean members have fallout out of different clades than their Andean counterparts. We just don't have a huge sampling of the dioecious members so far yet.
This reminds me of my other question that I forgot. So the species, the 10 species that you couldn't classify based on the morphology that seem to still have some ovules. So where do they fall on the phylogeny? Are they like intermediate towards Dioecy or something?
As far as I can remember, many aren't sampled. Yeah, but they are all Andean.
Well, the whole clade is kind of Andean.
Yeah.
Do we have any other comments here?
I would have another question.
Okay.
If no one else has one, that would be if you have an idea of what the pollinators and the flower morphology is of the species, the other Miconia 3 species that are not dioecious. Are they also generalists? Do they also produce nectar? Do we have any information? So I just don't know which species are in Miconia 3. So I think that would be very interesting to conceptualize, also to think about where Dioecy may have come from and how.
I do think that there are other generalists, definitely, again, not as much documentation, but in Ambliarena, there's generalists. I've also seen it out in the field. As far as nectar producing, I want to say yes, but I can't think of a species at the top of my head outside of section Cremanium in this clade that are nectar producing.
Yeah, there are nectar producing that are not dioecious, and there are things in other in a lot of other even tribes that are, I mean, clades within Miconia that are not Miconia 3. Vinicius has documented some of that. Ricardo Kriebel had a paper on that. There is the thing is that we don't have the natural history for most of them. And in some cases the nectar is very sweet smelling. Well, most of my cranium has sweet smelling nectar, but some of the things in what used to be Kenanthera, and it's like foul smelling, is really bad smelling, and those tend to be visited by flies. Yeah.
The 2 species I saw last year, though, they had different smells and were visited by primarily the same things, which was interesting. Oh, and yes, I will do the floral scents.
Nice. Yeah, I'm thinking that we saw one Ambliarena species, the one with the yellow anthers in Peru, that was sort of on the way up to your species. I mean, that had very generalist pollinator assemblages. So I'm assuming that it offered more, probably more than just pollen, but that would be very easy to check for you maybe next year, to sort of try to have from Miconia 3 field data for both dioecious and non-dioecious species to actually back that up.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
I wouldn't think that these dioecious species would have all these traits exclusively, but one idea I have is that given that this lineage already had these traits, nectar producing, generalist pollinators, small flowers, trees, fleshy fruits, that possibly Dioecy was more viable within this lineage, and that once it evolved, it could actually take hold and diversify.
Exactly, especially if backed up by apomixis.
Yeah, that too. I really want to have like solid proof of that. I mean, the experiments that I did were on one individual. I'm going to try and find different individuals to do it on.
I have a question. A great talk, Juan. I'm just curious, and I got a little bit late into the talk, so I don't know if you already talk about this, but do you know if the ants and the other insects are the same species throughout? Or
Like the same insect species?
the same ant species?
Oh, no, I did collect ants, but I haven't been able to receive them from the, not the herbarium, but the natural history department there. But it did seem, it to me, to my non-trained ant eyes, it did seem like they were the same species running around the tree. And as far as general insects, in both male and female plants, I would observe like the same wasps, the same flies coming. I'm hoping to, at the very least, ID them down to family level or genus level. So I'm working on that.
Yeah, I ask this because this species is such a widespread, altitudinally. So I mean, I wouldn't expect the same ant, but I have absolutely no idea about ants. So
yeah, so
except the Argentinian ant that's everywhere in South America, has colonized all of the Americas now. But so
yeah, that brings
anyway,
up a
I
great
was just
question,
curious.
because the plants that I observed were at 2,200 meters, but it would be really cool to do the same observation on the same species, but much higher up, and see what changes.
Please do it.
I have another question. We know so little about self-incompatibility in melostomes, but last I thought about this, the family tends to be self-compatible, right? I remember from my own experiments, but that's 25 years ago. Agnes, right?
Everything I've tested in Mariani is self-compatible.
Right.
I could just talk from Mariani.
And I'm just touching for a few things that I've tested a long time ago. This is another, it's so hard to understand the evolution of Dioecy in this group. What the heck is the adaptive value? It's just, yeah.
It's quite a puzzle.
It's super difficult question. Yeah. And it's not
Agnes, can you
increase of heterozygosity.
just, I didn't hear very well, Agnes. Is it they are all self-compatible?
Yes, all Mariani that I tried, so Axinea, Mariania, and Adelobotris that I've tested, apomixis and self-compatibility, they're all self-compatible.
Okay,
That
thank you.
data, I need to publish it. It's still sitting around somewhere.
Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, that would be very interesting to know for Juan's group also, like the Miconias that are not dioecious.
Yeah.
Are they self-compatible?
So do they escape? The ones that are dioecious clearly don't get their own pollen onto their stigma, which would be an advantage if that pollen clutters up the stigma, right? Stigma clogging. This is a general idea of the advantages of being dioecious, that you don't mess up this limited space with your own pollen grains, just physically. Okay, so that could be a driving mechanism, an adaptive advantage of really keeping your tiny little receptive surface free of your own pollen.
So what are your thoughts on
Just
the
by
different expression? You know, like why is it expressed so differently and in such a...
I do not have, I want to think more about it. I think it's a great topic that you have, and particularly bringing in the morphology, actually looking what these things look like morphologically. What are the steps there? I think is great, but I do not have an answer. But this
idea, we're at 11.
Hypothesis. In the beginning of your talk, you could set up that stigma clogging hypothesis. If you Google that, you find interesting papers about it.
It does seem we're at 11 now. So if anyone has to go, I think Fabian has already left to the curator.
Exactly. Fabian has left. I didn't want to break up the discussion. I need to leave too, but I want to give you, like, you can all stay and continue chatting.
I have to go as well.
Otherwise, next month it's gonna be Constantine Copper, my PhD student, talking about floral syndromes across Mollustomataceae, so like pantropical flower evolution in Mollustomataceae.
Right. I will send you that
Well-
nut paper about the seed compensation in dioecious species.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you a lot, Juan. And yeah, everyone has a great day. Looking forward to seeing you all next month.
I
Bye.